Good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this instalment of Black, Brown and Green Voices. I'm Dr. Miriam Nihan-Gray, and we're really delighted from our intellectual home of the Centre for Irish Studies at New York University, Glucksman Ireland House, and our partners in this series, the African American Irish Diaspora Network, to present our conversation, or my conversation with, I always drag Kim in for some help with Kit de Waal. We're going to speak about her wonderful memoir, Without Warning and Only Sometimes, which I'm pleased to report is available in the United States for the cohort. Most of our audience, I think, will be coming from that side of the Atlantic. Just in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, closed captioning has been enabled. So if anyone needs to avail of that, just click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We are recording this conversation. It will be posted later on the Glucksman Ireland House YouTube channel. And Kit has a hard stop at 12:45 Eastern, 5:45 Irish British time. So we will be kind of ending kind of sharply, and I'd encourage anyone, we did put it in our reminder email, if you have questions or comments there up front, don't be shy about putting them into chat, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And just one last housekeeping thing is to thank our promotional partners, the Schomburg Centre, NYPL Schomburg Centre for Research in Black Culture, and the John Brademas Centre for helping us to get news of this conversation out to as wide an audience as possible. So I'm going to stop talking now for a moment and hand over to my wonderful colleague at NYU, Kimberly DaCosta, who is also on the board of the African American Irish Diaspora Network. And Kim has been very generous with her time to introduce Kit before we go into the interview. So I'll hand over to you now, Kim.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I'll get right to it. Kit grew up in 1960s Birmingham to an Irish mother and a Caribbean father. Her debut novel, My Name is Leon, was shortlisted for the DaCosta First Book Award, won the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year, and was adapted into a film for BBC One. The Trick to Time was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and she's also written a short story collection, Supporting Cast, both published by Penguin. She's the editor of the Common People Anthology and co-founder of the Big Book Weekend Festival. Her gripping memoir, Without Warning and Only Sometimes, Scenes from an Unpredictable Childhood, charts how varied and unpredictable her childhood often felt. And we are now going to hear more. Back to you, Miriam.
Thanks so much, Kim, and thanks for being on with us today. Kit, thanks again for doing this and for enabling us to, oh, sorry, I'm just after turning off your video, Kit. I apologize. I'm sorry. I was trying to spotlight you there and I turned you off by accident, so apologies. Welcome to the program, and I suppose what I will do many plugs for the book and really encourage you. It's a great read, and for anyone, by definition, if you're on this conversation in particular and part of this series, you'll find it really, really interesting in terms of themes around race, class, you know, the Black experience in Britain, the Caribbean. There's a bit of an American. All Irish families have American relatives, and actually all Caribbean families have American relatives as well. So there's a lot in there. I suppose, Kit, for the benefit of people watching who haven't yet read your memoir, you grow up in Moseley Village, if I'm correctly pronouncing the location in Birmingham. And for everyone listening, it's Birmingham in the UK we're talking about today, not Birmingham, Alabama. That's an important thing to note. So it seems like Moseley was a very interesting part of Birmingham which had this mix of people of African descent, people of Irish descent. For anyone familiar with the trajectory of migration into Britain in the period, it would have been reflecting, I guess, some of the most recent immigrants into the area, and I suppose would have been outside of London a major hub of immigration. Can you tell us, Kit, by way of introduction to the memoir, about that world and the intersectionality of these various things that were going on in your childhood?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here to speak to you. I was born in July 1960, and what had been going on for 5 years post-war was that England was asking for people from the Commonwealth countries to come and help rebuild England after the war. Loads of people had died, obviously, and the place was a mess. There was loads of jobs, there was loads of work. So the call goes out to Ireland, as it always was, but to the Caribbean particularly, to say, come and help us build. There's jobs, there's, you know, land of milk and honey. And so my father and my mother's family answer that call. My father comes over in 1957. My mother was here already in Birmingham. And of course, no, your labour might be wanted. Certainly you are not wanted as a black person in England. You know, my dad became a bus driver. What you had, as probably happens in every single country, is that there are immigrant areas. You're allowed to live in certain places. You are not allowed to live in other places. And what you would often find in the 50s and early 60s are signs on the window of boarding houses, particularly, or houses to buy, that said no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And so what you would find is that the blacks and the Irish would, because they were the biggest immigrant groups of the time, they would end up in the same area, in the same boarding houses very often. And of course, when you put the Irish and the blacks together in one boarding house, you're going to get children. And I'm one of those children. My father experienced a significant amount of racism, as did my mother. The Irish were no more welcome than black people at all. So we moved from a very, very immigrant area called Small Heath to a less immigrant area called Moseley, which was, we were just on the border of Moseley. It's a really middle class area. And so my dad, I think we got into Moseley by about 50 yards, you know, away from the other immigrant area. So we had quite a bohemian upbringing because we lived in Moseley, in this very middle class area, right on the edge of Spark Hill and Sparkbrook, different areas that were chock-a-block with Irish and African Caribbean people, and just the beginning of Pakistani and Indian people coming as well.
So it seems that from the memoir, Kit, that from a pretty early age you were very aware of the different sides of your family in terms of the black side. I mean, I guess you've referred to your black nana, if I remember correctly, yeah, and the Irish side and everything. As a mixed race child, mediating that, and I suppose, like, how were there other? I don't know whether you mentioned that in the book. Were there other families like yours in proximity?
So in my area, on my side of town, there were two other mixed race families, and you all knew each other because you were so unusual. It was not like now at all. If you saw another mixed race person, you'd be like, oh my God, because we were rare. We were the first, the older generation of mixed race people. Now, my children don't think anything of seeing a black person on telly. Don't think anything of seeing a black Irish person, a black man with a white woman. My God, it's just nothing. In those days, it was still a very, very big deal. There was a family nearby. There were two families nearby who had mixed race children of our age. And as for negotiating being mixed race, I never, in those days anyway, it was called half caste. Nobody used the word mixed race. You were called a half caste. And I would have used that phrase. And all I knew is, my earliest memory is that I had black nana and I had white nana. And black nana, you used certain language and words and behavior. And for white nana, a different register to your voice, because you became sort of Irish in talking to white nana. And it was just a slightly different lilt to the voice and a different, very different vocabulary and sentence structure. And the same for black nana and for my father. And then a different sentence structure and language and register and vocabulary for school. And this code switching that went on, unknown to me, I wouldn't even have called it code switching. I didn't even know I switched. Looking back, I know I switched. At the time, I was just being me and allowing those different expressions of myself free rein. I knew this is how to communicate in this environment. Only much later did I realise what I was doing, that there was these different aspects of my personality, my identity, that would have this expression and this expression and this expression. And now, I mean, I think at some point, maybe in my 20s, I would have felt a bit of a fraud about that. I'd have felt that there should be one solid, static person that never changes. I don't feel like that now. I feel absolutely fine about having a West Indian vocabulary when I talk to my West Indian friends, and a different voice for them, and a different voice for that, and a different voice when I'm teaching, and a different vocabulary. It's all me. I feel no problem about that. So I'm quite sure some other people might think that's not right. For me, it's just absolutely cool. I'm very happy with it. And if communication, purpose of communication is to be understood, then whatever you have to do to be understood by that particular audience is fine by me. Obviously, at some core level, there is a voice. And there is a voice when I'm talking to my brothers and sisters that must be the true me. And the only people that I would have that voice with would be my brothers and sisters who came from where I came from, who have their own satellite versions, you know, have their own galaxy of voices for their friends. And for me, it's a joyous thing. It's a great thing to be able to do that invisible, seamless transition from one culture and class to the next. It's a skill like having, you know, like speaking French, Spanish, German, and Portuguese. You know, it serves the same purpose in my life.
I suppose, Kit, in you mentioning your family there, and I can't believe we're 15 minutes into this before I'm mentioning it. I suppose the core or one of the big themes around your memoir and your childhood is the fact that you're raised Jehovah's Witness, right?
Yes.
And that got me thinking, because, you know, in the American experience, Catholicism is so much part of the Irish experience, and I know it is in Britain too. But can you contextualize a little bit your mother, essentially, from what I can gather, when you're 6 years old, converting to, presumably she had been raised Roman Catholic. I'm making an assumption there. And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because, I mean, on what, like, especially from an American perspective, to reject Catholicism is such a major part of your Irishness, to a greater or lesser degree for everyone, and depending on when we're talking about in time, right? But can you talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so my mother, in having children with a black man, so horrified my grandmother, my Irish nana, that my mother would never have gone back to church. She would have felt completely rejected by the church. You know, she was sleeping with a monkey. We were neither fish nor fowl. We were not one thing or the other. I mean, you know, all of the stuff that you hear. So there was a lot of rejection already by my mother. My mother would have equated the Catholic Church with her mother. There would be no separation. So she rejected the Catholic Church it was automatically a rejection of her mother. Not that she formally rejected her, but she never felt accepted by the Catholic Church at all. So she was ripe for the plucking when Jehovah's Witnesses knocked the door, promising everlasting life, acceptance by God. There is no difference between black and white. You can all live forever. You can live in this paradise where black lives alongside white. And she just fell for it hook, line and sinker. She completely bought into the notion of us being Jehovah's Witnesses and having to go out knocking doors to converting other people. She felt accepted by Jehovah, which she calls God, in a way that she never felt by, say, the Pope. There's a lot of condemnation in Jehovah's Witnesses about wrongdoing, and my mother almost wanted to be slapped on the wrist and then forgiven. She wanted, you shouldn't have done that, because she had 3 children out of wedlock, and she always wanted that sort of naughty, and now you're okay. The sort of confessional, really. She wanted to go somewhere to deliver this sin to somebody so they could say, now you're wiped clean, go ahead and sin no more. And that's what she got from Jehovah's Witnesses. It's an utterly joyless religion. There is not a celebration in the calendar that you can have, not your birthday, not your wedding anniversary, not Christmas, Easter, bonfire night, St. Valentine's Day. Whatever it is, you're not doing it. It's a joyless religion. And we were brought up in that environment of joylessness, really, from my mother's point of view. And we had to go to these meetings 3 times a week. We had to read the Bible from cover to cover. We had to read other Jehovah's Witnesses publications. So there was lots of, I would call, religious oppression, you know, in shaking off Catholicism. And maybe she thought the oppression went with it. She went from the frying pan into the furnace, absolutely. So it would be fair to say we hated it. Because we never got Christmas presents and birthday presents, mostly, but for lots of other reasons too. But we had each other, and we would find the joy in mocking people at church, or we were just generally badly behaved children. And by the time each of us was 16, apart from one of us, by the time each of us was 16, we were out of the house, no longer Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, let's go and taste the forbidden fruit. And
your father in this, then, he just was, he didn't become Jehovah's Witnesses.
No,
this was your mother's enterprise with you guys, basically.
Completely my mother's enterprise. My father, though, thought it was fantastic that he didn't have to buy any birthday presents or Christmas presents. So he was only too happy to subscribe to it. Also, it's a punitive religion and a strict religion, and it kept us in line. You know, we weren't going out with boys, we weren't drinking. Well, I mean, we were, but you know, we shouldn't have been drinking, smoking, fornicating, staying out late, listening to pop music. Anything that would make your teenage years bearable was banned. So my father thought that was quite good. You know, that's quite a good way of keeping his children in check. So whilst he didn't believe it, he certainly didn't worry about us being Jehovah's Witnesses.
And to explain a little bit for your father, I mean, the kind of theme of exile for him in terms of wanting to go home and putting everything in. I mean, it seems like he had a plan to move back to the Caribbean, to St. Kitts, right?
Yes.
But it doesn't seem like it was that practical, Kit, and it might have involved you guys or your mother, right? It was a solo plan.
Yeah, so well, he came to England for 5 years. You know, he didn't come for a long time. The travesty from his point of view is that he happens to meet a Catholic girl who doesn't believe in birth control. So he comes for 5 years, and in those 5 years, he finds himself with 5 children. And then it's sort of a different plan. You know, he's got not that he barely provided for us, but, you know, he's got 5 children. So all through my childhood, I mean, all through it, he talked about going home. I'm going to go home. when I go home, this is what home's like. Wait till I go home. This will happen when I go home. It was a mantra that just populated my life. It was never when we go home, or this is what, you come with us and you'll see. He used to tell us it was beautiful, but he never said, oh, it'd be great when we live there. We knew he was going home. If, you know, might include us if we begged him or whatever, but we didn't want to go anyway. And when I was 14, after many years of talking about going home, my father decides to go home and saves up and buys a ticket, a 6-month open ticket to go back to the West Indies. And, you know, we're like, thank God we can get away with a few, you know, pull the wool over my mother's eyes. But, you know, we were just overjoyed he was going to go for 6 months. And he went with this ticket after many, many months of preparations of what he was going to wear and how he was going to look and how great it was going to be. And in 2 weeks, he was back home.
Oh, wow.
And he came back after 2 weeks because, of course, the island he left in 1957 was not the island he found in 1974. It moved on. All of his friends were in the UK, no one there anyway. It was too hot, he said, and we were like, yes, Dad, it's the West Indies. He said it was too hot, the food wasn't right, it was too spicy, telly wasn't good. You know, he had become an Englishman. He would never have admitted that, never even thought of it. He missed England and he wanted to come home. And so, I mean, he came home after 2 weeks. And quite frankly, having spent nearly 20 years yearning for this return, desperate to go home and to find what he'd left, to return conquering hero, but also to reclaim a little bit of his identity as a West Indian, to be amongst West Indians, to be home where he was brought out, and to find that when he got there, oh my God, he doesn't belong there either. He never felt he belonged in England. But now the escape route, the place he did belong, where he was going to find this peace, that was also taken away from him. And he never really recovered from that. He went back, I think, once more in his life, but it sort of broke him and destroyed him. He became a different person after that. He knew there was no way out now. I'm left in England with these children and with this woman I don't particularly love, in a racist country that had not ever accepted him. So it was quite a hard thing for him going home and finding it so changed.
It seemed there's something heartbreaking. I thought he was 2 months there. I didn't realize it was as short as 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Yeah.
In Without Warning and Only Sometimes, Kit, and I think this is featured in some of your other writing as well. The Birmingham bombs of the early 1974, I believe, which leads to, for people who don't know, leads to actually one of the most famous miscarriages of justice in the British criminal justice system. And you're there for that. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that was like to be Irish, or well, to be not visibly necessarily identifiable as Irish, right?
Yes. So it's November 1974, so I'm 14, and the school I go to is a long way away, and I have to go through the city centre. And on this particular day, the buses are diverted because we didn't know at the time, but it was because of these horrendous bombs that had been planted in Birmingham and killed 70 people, I think. Anyway, a lot of people had died. It was the worst bomb on British mainland, on the British mainland ever there has been. So when I get to school, there's a special assembly for all the children, and we all gather together. And the headmaster says to us, "There's been a bomb," and it's the IRA. And the IRA, the word the IRA is synonymous with terrorism, in the same way that if someone says ISIS now, people think of terrorists, rightly or wrongly, people think of terrorists, and exactly the same with the IRA in England in the 70s. And then there's this sort of recounting of what's happened and, you know, how terrible it is and how tragic and how brutal this bomb is. And so as we disperse as school children into our classes, you can hear what people are saying about Irish, and there's no distinction between the IRA and Irish people. The IRA is Irish people, all Irish people, North or South, Republican, Unionist, it doesn't matter. There's no distinction. The dirty Irish, the stupid Irish, the brutal Irish, pigs. I mean, I could go on. Terrible words that are being said about Irish people. Now, nobody knows I'm Irish at school because I look black. I am black. So I'm in that situation where lots of white-skinned black people are in very often, where it's up to you whether you declare your Irishness and whether you stand up and be counted and you say, when people are talking about the dirty Irish, how stupid they are, where you say, not all Irish people, I'm Irish, or you just declare which side you're on. And I didn't. I kept quiet. I didn't say, oh, hang on a minute, I'm Irish. Irish people aren't all like that. I had already at school suffered, you know, loads of racism for being black. And I was just like, my God, I'm not going to go through all over again. Didn't have that conscious thought, but I knew I was not going to say I'm Irish. And so all day and for weeks, months even, at school, I would hear this rhetoric against the Irish, which I never declared, never stood up and be counted alongside Irish people. I don't feel shame about that, but I understand as a child, you know, it was the decision I made. I'd make a very, very different decision now. And then obviously for months onwards, my mother was one of 9 children. So we had 8 uncles and aunts in Ireland, in Birmingham. And it was not safe to go out if you're an Irish person. All the Irish pubs were very, very targeted by British thugs who wanted to take their anger out on any Irish person. Any Irish name was met with disdain. So my own name is O'Loughlin, which is a very Irish name. And, you know, anyone with an Irish name would be sort of targeted or looked at. Anyone with an Irish accent would be targeted or looked at. It was a very strange time. And the first time really that I personally had witnessed Irish racism against Irish people. I'd never seen that before. I knew about it as a black person. I didn't feel it and experience it. I know my mother had, but I hadn't. And that was a wake-up call for me about my identity as an Irish person and the necessity to feel proud about that and to feel able to declare that when it wasn't automatically given to me.
So you tell an anecdote related to that in your memoir, Kit, in terms of, just to be clear, so your maiden name, as we use that word, which
yes,
is O'Loughlin, which
yes,
is on the Caribbean side, right? So your father, like many people in the West Indies, bore an Irish name. Do you know anything about where that came from, Kit?
Yes, apparently in the island that my father lived on, St. Kitts, there was an Irish overseer called O'Loughlin. And whether or not he had children, we're not sure, but he certainly owned, supervised, is very unclear, slaves. And the slaves just became O'Loughlin slaves. So you just took the name O'Loughlin. Some of those people would have been O'Loughlin's children. Maybe that's my father, I don't know. So yeah, very bizarrely, although my mother's Irish, I've got the Irish surname from the Caribbean. roundabout way.
And that's why in that period, the police called to your house, right, to talk to your dad, because he had that.
Yes. So on the night after the bombs, I think it was, the police came to our house looking for Mr. O'Loughlin. Clearly, they had some kind of lead about the bombs, and so they were O'Loughlin's a relatively unusual name in Birmingham. And so they just were looking at every O'Loughlin, and they came to our house and knocked the door and said to my mother, "Can I speak to Mr. O'Loughlin?" And when my dad came, they were like, "Okay, it's not you. You're obviously not an Irishman," which my dad found funny. My mother did not find funny at all, because she understood the implications of the police looking for Irish people and what might happen to them.
Kit, I'm conscious of time, and I wish I had longer, and I hope that we will have opportunities to engage with you and your wonderful writing and articulation of so much, both in this memoir and in your fiction writing. Can I ask you, you kind of touched on this a little bit implicitly, but maybe if you wouldn't mind speaking to it a little bit more. In recent years, the profile of being of Black and Irish descent is less unusual or more visible. I know in Britain, and you know, there's work going on in the United States and in other places. And I think I don't know to what extent you've celebrated that or leaned into that as something in terms of how you self-identify as someone from Birmingham of Caribbean and Irish descent. Could you contextualize that a little bit?
Yes, I think about 10 years ago, maybe more, I got my Irish citizenship. So my mother, before she died, obviously she was an Irish citizen, and she got dementia, and part of that dementia manifested itself in her wanting to go to Ireland, and she was, you know, I don't think she was born there. She was born here, but she was, you know, she had a lot to do with Ireland, and she wanted to go to Ireland. She wanted to sort of get back in touch with the person she felt she was. That was part of her dementia, part of just aging, I think, being very interested in yourself as part of a community, sometimes a movement, sometimes a race, sometimes a place. But I've found that certainly as I've aged, you do start thinking about yourself in a much more global context. I think certainly when I was 20, I was just totally selfish. I'm just here, I'm great. And then as you get older, you get this more expansive view of yourself in the world. I do anyway. So I got my Irish passport, and this was just before Brexit, which was travesty of travesties in my view. And so I have this Irish passport, as do my brothers and sisters. And I don't know why it was a symbolic thing. I don't need an Irish passport at all. You know, I can go anywhere on my British passport, or could before Brexit. But the minute I got it, I was like, oh my God, you know, oh, I'm Irish. Oh, you know, it made me no more Irish the day before than the day after. But all of a sudden, this piece of paper, this little booklet, I felt like proclaiming, I felt it proclaimed my identity. I've never had an issue in telling people I'm Irish. I mean, on the forms, you know, like you get the forms to fill in, and if you're mixed race, that form's just a joke, always is a joke. And I always used to put Irish Caribbean, and someone once said to me, "Do you mean white and Caribbean?" I said, "No, Irish and Caribbean, not white and Caribbean. White doesn't cover it for me. I'm not happy with white. I want to be identified as an oppressed white, oppressed by the English, white, Irish heritage, background, language, history. I want all that there in Irish. White doesn't cover it. White goes from, I don't know, England to Russia and every country in between. And I just wasn't happy with that. And it's very important for me to say that. It's also very important for me to identify myself as part of the one of the countries that were oppressed by the English. Just the same way as lots of the empire was oppressed Ireland was also oppressed. And still people in England to this day speak about Ireland as one of their countries. I can remember going to Ireland recently, and someone, an Englishman there, said, I haven't got time to do that because I'm returning to the mainland in a few days. I was like, it's not the mainland, it's a different country. But the psyche of a lot of British people is that Ireland is still just an offshore island of England. And I think it's very important when you identify yourself as an Irish person to absorb that history, to proclaim that history of being ex-empire and one of the countries that suffered under English rule, the same way as the Caribbean suffered and Africa suffered under English rule. So for me, it's the most joyous thing in the world. It's something I'm very proud of, to be Irish and to be Caribbean. They both feature so much in my thinking of myself and in my children, both of whom are adopted, one of whom has some Irish heritage. And they, you know, I often talk about, oh, should we go on holiday to Ireland? They're like, no, Mom, no, only you want to go, because they want to go somewhere sunny and bright like Spain. And I'm like, oh, you know, we could go to Ireland, and they're not interested. I go so often now, it feels completely like home. Having been brought up with the Irish accent as a sort of music, a sort of lullaby, and the background noise to my life. When I come to Ireland, it's like that. It's a touchstone for me with the my childhood identity.
You know, the irony of the fact that I don't know whether it is Jehovah's Witnesses aren't allowed to read, but you basically didn't read anything outside the Bible, from what I can gather, until you're in your early 20s, which is,
yes.
Given your acumen now and great success, is a major irony, right? I suppose, Kit, the fact that you're mixed race and the code switching and the outsider status, I've seen you speak to that a little bit before. Do you really think that that's very much part of that observer, that great keen observation skill that great writers need? You think that's part of your background? Yeah.
Yeah, there's an anecdote about Graham Greene, who was in a hospital ward for sick children. He was a child, and in the bed next to him, a child died. A child that he'd been talking to, a girl died that he'd been talking to, and they pulled the curtain round, and the parents came, and there was weeping and everything, and he was really upset. And he writes about this himself, and he said, even in his upset state, and even in this moment of high tension, he was observing it. He was not in it. He was like, oh, that's what it looks like. That's the sound of someone crying. That's the swish of the curtain. That's the nurse's outfit. And he calls it having a little, it's like a shard of flint in your eye. You're seeing everything, but it's like you're slightly outside of it as well. You're watching it. How to describe that? It's not particularly a nice thing, you know, that you're not in the moment and feeling these things, but you're watching these things. You're outside of it, slightly not involved. And I know that's what I was like as a child. I can remember it absolutely. The watching of people was my greatest joy. For me, it was like the telly. Why would you watch the telly when you can go and sit on the wall outside the house and watch people walk up and down the road? It was a joy. I used to, instead of listening to the teacher, I would watch the teacher, and each teacher's tics, and each teacher's, you know, that teacher always had a Pringle jumper, that one had a pleated skirt, that one's hair was fuzzy. I was absolutely obsessed with detail of people and the way they moved and the way they spoke and the little tells. I probably would have been a good poker player. The tells that people had when they were nervous or worried. For me, absolutely interesting. I didn't know I was going to be a writer. I had no intention of being a writer, and I wasn't published till I was 55. But I do know that that's even now, me sitting in a cafe, it's a joy. You know, it's the best film ever, and it changes all the time, and it's free.
Yeah. Well, I hope you continue to do that. Are you working on anything at the moment that you can tell us?
I'm working on a novel that I would say is right at the limits of my talent. It's quite hard. I love it, and I'm on draft 39, just in case anyone feels that writers have an easy ride. It's a tough one, and I absolutely love it, and it ends in County Mayo. So I hope I can do it justice.
Well, listen, Kit, we're just shy of your cutoff there by 2 minutes, and I'm sorry. I think everyone was just hanging on every word you said, and I hope I did justice in my questions. And I don't know if Kim is still on there, but I'm really happy that I think a lot of people are tuned in this afternoon to watching the American president in Ireland, but I'm really delighted that you're here with us right now. And Kit, keep observing and keep writing. Kim, anything there before we finish off? Do you want to? You enjoyed it. I know so much of this was really fascinating to you.
There are so many things I want to talk to Kit about, and the parallels between growing up in Boston and Birmingham. I mean, at some other time.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, please, let's come back to that.
Yes,
thank you. And as I said, Without Warning and Only Sometimes is available in the US now, folks. It's a wonderful read. And as I said at the top of our conversation, by definition, by you being here with us today, you'll find this really fascinating, and she's just a wonderful writer, and we look forward to that novel, which will get beyond draft 39 soon, I'm sure.
I hope so. Yes.
Thank you so much, Kit. Lovely to meet you. I hope we meet you again.
Thank you. And thank you so much to everyone that came. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. And that will be on the YouTube channel, the Luxman Ireland House YouTube channel, if you'd like to watch it back or share it. And we will reconvene in May, on May 29th, with Professor Mary Burke to speak about her fabulous new book on Irish America and race. Another different, but we're touching on some of the themes from Kit's memoir. We're really excited about that. But thank you again, Kit, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks,
you. Kim.